myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past.
Good afternoon and welcome along to a special Easter edition of NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, and it's a big happy birthday for yesterday to Mick Lowes. How are you, Mick?
I'm good, Stephen, thank you. 60 years of age yesterday, felt about 75 this morning. One thing I would like to say is I was blessed in 1991 to be able to go and live and move and work in the northeast of England, in the best city in the world, Newcastle upon Tyne. And 30 years on yesterday, I'd like to thank everybody who helped me feel the love 30 years on. Messages, loads of them. And I'd just like to thank everybody from the northeast who wished me a happy birthday. I didn't feel quite as happy or quite as fit this morning, but thank you very, very much. You will never be forgotten and you're forever in my hearts. And yeah, it was a good day. Six family, that's 5, 6. Yeah, we stuck within the restrictions. I didn't quite stick within my alcohol restrictions, but yeah, it was a good day. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Great
stuff, mate. And as always, plenty to talk about.
The football's going to spoil the weekend, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. Doesn't it always? Where do we start? I mean, let's start with Bruce's press conference yesterday. I mean, he said he hasn't paying any attention to the poll in the Chronicle. I'm not sure whether you saw that flying around social media this week, but 95% of the fans want Steve Bruce out of 14,000 people who took part. 5% said they would like him to stay. I never really hold a great deal of faith in polls. They can easily be, manipulated. Sunderland fans can be joining in and stuff like that. And look, it's a poll. 95% is pretty conclusive. Steve Bruce says he's not paying any attention to them. He's got Spurs to concentrate on, which of course you'd expect him to say. But I mean, it's not going to change anything, Mick, is it? We're still in this position where he's going to be manager at the end of the season, and Mike Ashley is also talking about offering him a new contract.
I mean, you can work it both ways, Steve. You're right. I mean, over the years, I was never a great fan of polls. I think they tend to be more accurate than inaccurate. I'm not saying that people manufacture polls, but on occasions they are manipulated. They can be manipulated. They're like any stats. They can be manipulated. It's the same stat that says it's 1 win in 5, but if you've drawn 3 of those games, it's only 1 defeat in 5, etc., etc. So figures are there to be manipulated. The one thing I would say about polls in the current climate, Steve, is it's our only way of getting a cross section and a consensus of human opinion, of fan opinion, because they're not in the ground. And as much as Steve Bruce says, okay, I take on board what the polls are saying, or I don't take on board what the polls are saying. What we would do in an ideal world, what we would do in the real world, what we would do in every season for the past 25 years is not go on polls, is not go on this manufactured stat and that manufactured stat. We would go on 52,000 people at St James's Park. And believe me, as you know, and we all know listening to this, if 52,000 vent their spleen, if 52,000 want you out of that football club, believe me, you will leave that football club. So Steve Bruce, as much as he might, be slightly reticent to believe the polls, I'm sure deep down, because as we know, he's from the northeast, he's from Newcastle upon Tyne, he knows Newcastle United as well as most people. He knows that if he had been conducting his job as manager of Newcastle United on the touchline with 52,000 in St James's for the last 8 months or whatever, it's highly likely he wouldn't be in a job this morning. So, you may or may not like them polls. You may not, believe them. You may not stand any stead by them. But at this minute in time, they're the only thing we've got for fans to be able to say 95%, we want you out.
Yeah. Since we last spoke, of course, Hayden has now had a season-ending injury. How big a miss is he going to be?
Huge. I say huge. I mean, that is by way of a compliment to the young man, rather than we've lost Gary Speed, or we've lost Alan Shearer, or we've lost Fabrizio Collicini, or all the big players over the years. But in the context, it is a big blow. And if you ever wanted to have any sympathy for Steve Bruce, and I've come on here before and said I have respect for the man, and I wouldn't have his job in a million years, and I wouldn't work with Mike Ashley for all the tea in China. The one thing you would say about Steve Bruce is, in terms of injuries, at a really, really crucial time of the season, he has lost 2 and 3 and 4 of his big players. And Hayden, I mean, look at the injury, Steve. It's a complete freak injury, you know. He's got his back to the Brighton player. The Brighton player's fallen over. They've collided. He's twisted his knee. He's done his ligaments. He's out for the season. You couldn't make that up. You couldn't, you know, that wouldn't happen in 1,000 games, you know. So, you know, it is a body blow for Newcastle. What's, I think, more pertinent is, and I don't know how long it is since we spoke, maybe 3 weeks. They say time is a healer, and sometimes I often think that's, you know, that's convenient, and sometimes it doesn't feel like a healer. But I have to say, I think it has been for Steve Bruce, because I came away from that Brighton game, I think like you and like every Newcastle fan, believing that they, you know, well, I say believing, could not believe what they'd seen. You know, I mean, it was the most damning, the most abject, the most preposterous performance of a football team struggling to survive in the Premier League I think I've ever seen. It was absolutely nightmarish. And I spent 2 days afterwards thinking, what on earth has, what on earth has the state of football got to if that's a team fighting for their lives? Now, you know, as I say, time might be a healer, because it certainly dulled my memory of it, as horrible as it was. But I think that then begs the question, Steve, how big is tomorrow? How big is Tottenham Hotspur? Because I'm telling you now, Steve, if there's not a reaction of any sort, if there isn't a reaction of considerable size to that Brighton game, we may as well pack up and just wait until August and first game of the season against Derby County or Nottingham Forest. Because if we don't get any better than we did at Brighton, we have got absolutely no chance of surviving. At home tomorrow, Tottenham's not easy, but, you know, Tottenham Hotspur are Tottenham Hotspur. They're a bit flaky. But honestly, if we don't at very least see a reaction, if we don't see people tackling, if we don't see people closing down, if we don't see people chasing, if we don't see people sweating tomorrow, then we may as well give up. We may as well write this season off, because Brighton was an absolute debacle.
Yeah, it was. And a question from Joe Walker, just to let you know as well, West Brom currently 4-2 up against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, which is bizarre. And this is it. We're coming into that kind of crazy part of the season where strange results will happen. But yeah, 4-2 up.
Which is why, Steve, I think I said last time I was on, you know, when I got stick for suggesting that the point at West Brom was a decent point, or the point against, you know, such and such. You honestly, at this stage of the season, you cannot predict a thing. And for people to say it's a winnable game and we should pick up 3 points there, it's nonsense. Honestly, it's nonsense. Anything can happen at this stage of the season. And when you then factor in COVID, and you factor in no crowds, and you factor in the apathy, and you factor in just the general malaise in football, you've got absolutely no chance of picking a result. I've said it before, the only people in football who've come out of the pandemic with any sort of good feel-good factor are the bookies. The bookies must have won millions on fixed odds over the last year, because you cannot pick a result to save your life.
Yeah, very true. The question from Joe was, do you think the Brighton game is up there with one of the worst in recent times?
Unbelievably. I mean, I may even go as far in the context of the game, Steve. I mean, I always throw back to that awful League Cup defeat against Sheffield Wednesday's reserves at the St James's. But that was about the third or fourth round of the League Cup. It really, in the scheme of things, didn't have any serious bearing. Yes, you want to win a trophy. But the fact that it was Sheffield Wednesday's reserves, Newcastle were awful. And I remember going on the radio the following morning and saying, you know, it was once a cathedral on the hill, now it's a graveyard, etc., etc. We used to go to worship, now we go to remember the good times. It's awful, you know, blah, 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 blah. But Brighton was probably up there and beyond, because we're supposed to be fighting for our lives. We're supposed to be a club that is flying a flag for the northeast of England. We're supposed to be a club that's flying a flag for the most passionate set of supporters in the country, and yet they turn up at Brighton and do that. No, it was right up there with the very, very worst you'll see, not just from Newcastle United, but from any club.
Yeah, okay. Plenty of questions coming in. If you've got a question for Mick, just stick them in the chat. Roger Cook says, how much of the injuries can we link to Steve Bruce and his physio team, Mick? There's been a lot of criticism. I think people have highlighted it in the past about, the injury list was always the same at other clubs that he's been at. Is there much that can be said towards that, do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what can be said, Steve. Not so much that, because I don't know, and anybody somebody must have done an awful lot of homework if they've gone into Steve Bruce's injury record at all of his other clubs. I mean, that's just nonsensical. That's getting on that's on the verge of paranoia if you start doing that. But what I will say is that if we believe there is some sort of problem with injuries at Newcastle, and bearing in mind what we've just said there about Almiron, St Maximin, Wilson, now Hayden, that doesn't look good. That suggests that there's a problem. But I'm telling you, I could sit here for another 20 minutes and give you stories. I could give you stories of African players being sent back to Africa to see a witch doctor because they didn't believe in the medical people at Newcastle United. I can remember us all being shifted lock, stock and barrel by Graham Souness and moved down to the academy, and all the training was done down there, and first team players, millionaire players, had to get in the bus, get changed at the top end, walk all the way down the bottom end, because Graham Souness thought that the pitches at the training ground were you were more susceptible to groin injuries and hamstring injuries. Honestly, over the years, Steve Bruce is just a very small part of a problem where every manager at Newcastle has believed there's either a problem with the pitches or the medical staff or whatever. It's just what comes with football, Steve. That's just the game. You get injuries in the same way that you get, fluke results every now and then. It just happens.
What's your thoughts on the 6 days off, asks David Crone. Of course, it caused a bit of controversy. We went into an international break, and then, of course, the first thing that Craig Hope puts out is another story. He's obviously banned from the ground, so he's some may say that he has an agenda, others might say that he's just digging into Bruce because he feels a bit aggrieved of being banned. Whatever the reason, he came out with it, 6 in 9. What was your views on that?
My initial reaction was, again, I don't want to get into my relationship with Craig Hope or what I think of Craig Hope as a journalist, because I do think essentially he is a good journalist. He is.
He works for the club as well.
Yeah. He worked for the football club. He's a good journalist. He knows football. There is nothing essentially wrong with Craig in terms of his knowledge, in terms of his ability as a reporter. And like a lot of reporters, you get the bit between your teeth and you fall out with people, and maybe, I don't think there's a maybe. He's got an agenda with Steve Bruce, which is fair enough. I fell out with plenty of journalists in the North East and never spoke to them for a long time because of spats that we had between ourselves. What I would say is that the 6 days during international breaks is nothing new. I can remember. Back in the day when Newcastle were very successful, Steve, in a first team squad, because of the nature of the squad when we were successful, there was one man and a dog walking around for 2 weeks. There was no one there. Everybody was away on international duty. Now, because we haven't now got such a talented squad, there might be, 10 or 12 key members of the squad still around. But they need resting. They do need resting. And when you're looking at the final, 10, 12 weeks or whatever, or 6, 8 weeks, whatever it is now, you need to keep bodies fresh. And the other argument, of course, is that what can you really achieve when you've only got, maybe half a dozen at max of your first team, squad in the building? You can go out and you can pretend that you're going to play, attack against defence. You can work on set plays. But if your best 10 players are away on international duty, you can't really achieve anything. So when I read it, I thought it's a non-story. It really is a non-story. And it's a story which is, as I say, designed to give, to provide a stick with which to beat Steve Bruce. So no, I didn't like that story. As I say, regardless of what I think of Craig as a journalist, I thought that was probably just a bit too much of a stretch in terms of let's just keep the anti-Steve Bruce stuff going,
Yeah, this, it's never ending. It's going to be interesting, Mick, isn't it? Because, we've seen player fallouts. We know that Richie and Bruce have had words. I mean, yourself, it's common. It's common in dressing rooms and training pitches. People do fall out. It's human nature. But do you think that the team with these last 9 games can refocus now? Because it's quite clear that the messages come from above. Steve Bruce is going nowhere. So now it pushes it back onto the players. If you want to be a Premier League player next season, then you're going to have to pull your finger out, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that worried me, Steve, was I think the last time we were on, you asked me a question. I don't know whether it was your question or a fan's question. Do we think he's lost the dressing room? And at the time, this was pre-Brighton, by the way, I said, no, I don't think he has. I don't get the impression that they've downed tools. I don't get the impression that they are completely and utterly, on a mission to get him out of the football club and are not playing for him. And then all of a sudden, the Brighton performance. And the Brighton performance just led you to believe that there are serious, serious problems there. And that's why I think tomorrow will be an acid test, a real big test. Because I think if we see nothing tomorrow, albeit at home and albeit without a crowd, then I think, as I said earlier, the writing's on the wall, regardless of the fact that Fulham, have played a game more and are 2 points behind. I've just dig out. I don't think you can see these, but I dug out a load of my old team sheets. I've got a lot of Tottenham, Newcastle games over the years, and I'm looking at these. Like this, I can't remember what year this is. Centre midfield on this one, Livoya Emre. This one, Jermaine Genius, Gary Speed, Nicky Butt, Scott Parker. More recently, Chet Tiotti, Jack Colback. Going back a bit further, Kieran Dyer and Gary Speed. I always say it. Players are what you need. Players win games. I'm thinking about my team for tomorrow, and I'm just thinking, there's no leaders in there. There's no leaders. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that they're as spineless as they are and as spineless as they were. John Joe Shelvey, a bit in and out and a bit hit and miss, but is really the only established player in midfield, in that side. We're talking about Isaac Hayden being a blow, but Isaac Hayden is a young man making his way in the game. So who do you play tomorrow? You've got Joe Willock on loan from Arsenal. He's a kid finding his way. Do you play Longstaff? Do you play Murphy? Again, players finding their way, players not established. It's very, very difficult, Steve. As much as you'd like to come on and you'd like to say, we're going to turn it round, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to beat Tottenham, we're going to stay in the division, and we're going to beat the drop. It's incredibly hard to think that unless Fulham are worse than we are, that we'll go down.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, mate. Fungo, good afternoon, mate. He says, a lot of managers have had bad luck with injuries. Do you not think it's the facilities, Mick? You said last time that in the 90s we had footballers that wanted to be athletes. Now we've got athletes that want to be players.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that thought and that mantra, has really nothing to do with facilities. I mean, that's to do with whether it be on concrete, clay, whether it be on a 5-a-side pitch, or whether it be on an 11-a-side pitch. What I'm talking about is the mentality and the physical capabilities of players these days. These days, they are physically capable of doing 0 to 100 in 12 seconds. They are capable of running all day. But have they got a footballing brain inside their head? Probably not. Because then, to my mind, and this is a purely personal opinion, they're not in love with the game. They don't live and breathe the game. Some of those names I just read off there, yes, they were great players, but they were great players because, they loved the game. I'm not too sure players who are getting millions from a very early age these days are in love with the game. So, going back to the question, I think the facilities is an excuse. I just think everything is an excuse. At the end of the day, it boils down to, and as I say, Steve Bruce isn't the only one to be hit by injuries. They've all been hit by injuries, but it doesn't come down to necessarily the facilities. people have a go at the training ground, say, oh, we should have a new training ground. The training ground, in terms of facilities, might be a little bit archaic now. There's maybe not the infrastructure there. But to the best of my knowledge, and I love Mick and the ground staff at the football ground, they keep them pitches pretty good, Steve. You know, you go up to Long Benton and you have a look at the pitches. They're good enough for people to train on. They're good enough to not have the excuse that, oh God, he's gone over on his ankle because there's a divot, or he's not done this and he's not done that because the facilities and the ground staff haven't prepared pitches. The ground staff at Newcastle United are as good as any ground staff in the country, and they've won awards over the years, and I love them to death. So I'm not having it that players are picking up injuries because the facilities aren't good enough. It's just a factor of life, you know. Sometimes you might go 2 seasons, not pick up a single injury, but it's sod's law that just at a time when you need everybody fit and capable, you suddenly lose 4 top players, you know.
Yeah, okay. Chippers says, Mick, at Brighton when we needed a goal, Bruce didn't bring a striker on. What was your thoughts about that?
Well, I must admit, the one thing that I've found absolutely mesmerising in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, is this Dwight Gayle situation. You know, I mean, Dwight Gayle, he won't play him. He's reluctant to bring him in off the bench. And yet all of a sudden he's getting a new contract. Now, that is either tantamount to you and the club saying, we're going to get relegated. And Dwight Gayle, who I remember Alan Pardew telling me years ago, having seen him at Crystal Palace, at championship level, he'll do a job, but he won't score goals in the Premier League. And that's pretty much been Dwight Gayle's career to date, you know, whether you like him or not. You know, he's a decent player at championship level. He got 20-odd goals for West Brom only, 2 years ago, you know? So are they saying to us as fans, are they saying to us, we're saving him for the championship because we know we're in the championship next year? Because otherwise, why on earth would you give somebody a contract, a new contract, an extended contract, when at this minute in time, you're not even playing him, even when you haven't got a centre forward, when you've got no Callum Wilson, you've got no Joe Linton, even though he's fit because he's not a centre forward and he's not scoring your goals. So you need either Andy Carroll or Dwight Gayle to get you goals. And he's not prepared to play either. You know, Carroll's been used sparingly. Gale's barely been used at all. So I just don't understand the Gayle situation. And because they just can't score goals to save their lives. I mean, you know, you look at the league table, Steve. Brighton's goal difference of -4 is worth a point to them. You know, I don't actually think they'll actually be in the mix at the end of the day. I think it'll just be Fulham or Newcastle. But Brighton's goal difference of -4, even though they can't score, is worth a point to them. So it's down to either Newcastle or Fulham. Fulham's goal difference is better than ours, but we can't reduce our goal difference unless we start scoring goals, and we're not scoring.
Yeah, we're not scoring. That is the big problem. Let's just hope that some of these players can come back and, you know, potentially get us a couple of goals that'll get us to safety. Jeff says the general feeling is that if you pick Shelvey and Hendricks, we've had it. Would you pick Richie and the Longstaffs, Dwight and Andy, etc., Mick?
I think we had a conversation, Steve, didn't we, about 2 or 3 weeks ago about Richie, and I do like him. And I think, you know, I would like to say he'd be in my team, but at the same time, I think you have to be realistic. I think his feistiness is good. I think he cares. I think he rolls his sleeves up. I think he gives 100%. But I'm not sure where he plays nowadays. Do you play him wide? I think if I believed he had the legs, and if I believed he could do it, I might even play him in centre mid alongside Shelvey, one right, one left. But I'm just not sure it's his bat. I'm just not sure he could do that. And if you want to try and score goals, you know, whereas once upon a time Richie would be a good bet, I think at the minute, if St Maximum and Fraser are fit, they have to play in the wide positions in an attacking capacity. But there is an element of me that would like to play Richie, but I can't see it happening.
Okay, Paul Patterson says it was me that originally went back and checked Bruce's quotes and injury record at clubs. It's a very valid argument because he says the exact same thing every time. His fitness record is shocking. So thanks, Paul. I didn't realise you were in the chat today, but yeah, he did do his research, Mick. And I suppose if it brings up a result like that, then fair play to him.
Absolutely, 100%. I prided myself for years, on doing, 3-4 hours every day before a game. That's what these sheets are all about. And fair play to the lad. If he's gone back through his records, because that's what it's all about, Steve. If you've got an opinion in football, if you can back it up, then that makes your opinion that much more worthwhile. That makes your opinion that much believable, that much more credible. So yeah, I don't know it, but if Steve Bruce has got a history of injuries at other clubs, I mean, they talk about Bielsa at Leeds, don't they? They talk about the danger of Leeds blowing up in the final 15 minutes of games, which they invariably do, and almost did, if you remember, when we needed them to beat Fulham the other week, because he drives them and he runs them and he absolutely bleeds them during the week in training. But that's his belief. So maybe there is something that Steve Bruce does on the training ground that manifests itself in his squad getting more injuries. I don't know as much as Paul does, but if he's done his fact check, fair play to the lad.
Yep, okay. Mick, Neil Straker says, Mick, how many points can you see us getting in the remaining games?
I mean, you look at the fixtures, we have got more at home than away, but I just keep thinking, and I keep saying, it's almost impossible to second guess, and it's almost impossible to sort of even think about saying, right, we'll get one there, we'll get three there, we'll get none there, etc., etc. I just think, as I keep saying, it'll come down to Sheffield United and Fulham, last two games of the season, and that we will probably need, 4 points from those two games in order to survive. I don't see us picking up any real points of any note from Spurs, West Ham, Arsenal, Man City, Burnley, Liverpool and Leicester. You just can't see it. You can't see it. It's unrealistic to think it. But at the same time, I don't think Fulham, and as I say, I don't think Brighton will necessarily get dragged into it, but I don't think Fulham will set the world alight either. Fulham have got more games away from home than they have at home.
Okay, the return says, does Mick think another manager would get more out of the playing staff, or are the squad unimprovable? Good question.
I think the boat has sailed. I said that 3 weeks ago. I think he's lazy. I think he's unimaginative. I just don't think he cares enough, Mike Ashley. As I said before, I made it quite plain last time I was on that when he has changed it in recent years, he was handed Alan Shearer on a plate and he was handed Rafael Benitez on a plate, and they were the only reasons really he changed it. Otherwise, he just sits back. He doesn't really know what to do. Doesn't know whether to twist or stick, and just lets it take its course. And I think now, because there's a major question mark about whether he will be here in the long term, even though you can't believe he would let a club that he's trying to sell be relegated and its value then be diminished. I just don't think he cares. I don't think he's proactive. I don't think while other clubs really lose sleep at night thinking, God, we could go down. This would be a catastrophe if we were relegated. Don't think he cares about it, and I think it's rubbed off on other people at the football club. And I think whatever will be. It's a really sad state of affairs. It's interesting, Steve. I was thinking before I came on about our record against Tottenham. If you remember, a nice little piece of history for fans of a younger age. Our first ever Premier League game was against Tottenham. Remember, sunny afternoon in August 1993. I think Spurs played in light blue. Sheringham got the winner, and they won 1-0. And I must admit, I was thinking this morning, the commentary position, because the ground was being rejuvenated and realigned, was at sort of the back of the Milburn, but closer to the director's box. And for some reason, KK and Terry Mack were sat just along from me and Ando. And I was trying to think this morning, why were they in the stand and not in the dugout? Maybe someone can enlighten us on that one. Anyway, first game of the Premier League season was against Tottenham, and we lost 1-0. But do you know what it is? After that, we only lost 2 of 16 against Tottenham. Famously, remember, we beat them 7-1, and KK said after he left, I looked at Jerry Francis that day and I realised what it was like to be a manager who was in a harrowing position, and I never forgot it. But having lost only 2 of 16 at home against Tottenham, from 2008 onwards, we've won only 3 of 11. And do you know what happened in and around 2008? Your man took over. So it's a microcosm, the Tottenham fixture, of everything that is good and bad about Newcastle. That prior to 2008, we were at St James's almost invincible. The likes of Tottenham used to come, and we would, honestly, before we even kicked off, we'll beat Tottenham today. Now it's changed, and it's changed in the Ashley era. And I think we've won only one of about our last 5 against Tottenham. So it's very difficult to see anything but, a defeat tomorrow.
Nick from the Felon says, hi, Mick, I had a great bit of crack with you in the time bar. I love your knowledge. If you were allowed at a press conference, what is the one question you would like to ask Steve Bruce at the moment?
I think we had this one 2 or 3 weeks ago, didn't we? And I think I said if he had his time again, would he take the job? But I think we decided that he probably would, and then that developed into a conversation about, is he really a Newcastle United fan, and has he really got the club at heart in the way that we all think he has, and that again is up for debate. I don't know what question. I have to say, Steve, I keep coming back to the fact, and I know people don't like it because it feels like a defence of Steve Bruce, and it really isn't. It really isn't, because I do think his record now is so bad that there is no way justifiably he should be in a job. And over the years, I've seen good people lose their jobs at St James's with better records than Steve Bruce's. But what I would say is, I don't think we've ever been in a I don't think football's ever been in a situation like it is at the minute, in terms of the player power and the fact that players are able to pretty much get away with whatever they want to get away with. When I watched that performance of Brighton, Steve, I'm sorry, I wasn't jumping up and down saying Steve Bruce is of this and Steve Bruce is of that. I was saying these players are a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. Because and I don't like to name drop, but I mentioned Jake Burns, stiff little fingers, who I know you had on. Yeah. And I said to Jake Burns, a bit like me, I know it's a lesser argument with me, but if I'm having a poor day, if I've got distractions, if I've got this going on in my life or that going on in my life, but I'm telling you, Steve, a bit like you with this program, once you get behind that microphone, you put on a show, don't you? You put on a show. You say, right, stop that. I'm going to be the best I can be today. And I said to Jake Burns, as much as you're having a shit time with your record label or your manager or whatever, if you're putting on a show for 5,000 people on stage in Chicago, in Newcastle, in Sunderland, in London, wherever, as stiff little fingers, you do not let your standards slip. You do not put on a crap show just because you've fallen out with your manager, or just because they're your fans, they're your people. Same as me. When I got behind that microphone, I might have felt awful, or I might have had a bad day, but I never ever thought about anything other than giving the best service I could give. Now, footballers should think along exactly the same lines. Before they went out at Brighton, they should have said, I don't care whether I like Steve Bruce or not. I don't care whether I like Mike Ashley or not. I don't care whether I think Newcastle United should be in the Premier League. What they should say to themselves is, I am Isaac Hayden. I am Joel Linton. I am Jamal Lascelles. I am playing for my pride. I'm playing for people looking at me and thinking, God, what's wrong with him? He's rubbish. You don't. You put on the best performance, the best show, and I just don't understand why anybody would do that. So I do. Going back to the original question, yes, Steve Bruce is definitely a factor in their malaise, but these players get away with murder.
They do. Richard Naylor says, Mick, do you think Bruce is more to do with getting his final payout? Because I can't see him ever getting another head coach job. Again, I think we've had this one before, but it's a question people keep asking.
Well, I mean, all I would say on that is, and because I don't know Steve Bruce and I don't know his bank balance and I don't know how wealthy he is, I would imagine that he's wealthy enough not to have to worry about that. What I would say is, and I think I've said this before, once upon a time, managers did fall on their swords. They did. They did the, for want of a better word, honourable thing. They said, yes, I've let you down. Yes, I'm not doing the job that I was paid to do. Yes, I am letting my standards slip, and I'm going to walk away. The problem is, they're not. You're not going to walk away. Steve, I did a million talkings with players over the years, and I asked them all the same question, and that was, do you think the money you earn, you're worth? Do you think? I remember Gary Speed, God bless his soul. I remember I did a Desert Island disc with him, and I said it can't be right that you earn more in a week than a national health nurse earns in a year. And he said, of course it's not right. But we don't dictate. We don't say. He said, as they all said at all the talkings, Mick, if the BBC got you in an office and said, Mick, we want to pay you £150,000 a week, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm not worth it. I'm not worth that amount of money. Of course you take it, So it's a difficult one to square. I think Steve Bruce is, he's old school. I think he wants to try and make it work. And I've said before, I think he must sit at home in quiet moments. He has to, Steve. He has to think, I really don't like this. I don't want this. I don't like the stick. I don't like the aggravation. I don't like the fact I can't make 11 players go out and win a game of football for a club that I genuinely do like and do care for, and my father supported and my family support. I have sympathy for him. It's not working for him, and in an ideal world, he really should fall on his sword. But I respect the fact that you're not going to throw away £2 million out of principle these days.
Yeah, Funko says, quick question, if the players are arguing with Bruce, does this not show that they care? And if so, why should they be dropped? I'd sooner have 11 loudmouths out there than 11 lads just saying yes, boss.
Steve, it's like, it's easy in life, isn't it? They always say those who scream loudest aren't necessarily, the ones that you should listen to. I think, as I said in a fairly elaborate answer 2 minutes ago, players should forget their problems with Steve Bruce. They should, you look after yourself. You've got to have principles. You've got to have morals. You've got to have pride. And surely to God, self-pride makes you want to go out and win a game of football, regardless of whether your manager picks you or doesn't pick you, or you like him or you don't like him or whatever. And on top of that, why would you, Steve, not want to play in the Premier League next season? Why would you rather go to the City Ground, Nottingham, instead of Anfield? Why would you rather go to Pride Park, Derby, instead of Goodison Park? Why would you rather play, for argument's sake, Sunderland, rather than Arsenal or Chelsea? Why? It makes no sense to me. And they're not putting it in. They are not putting it in. And I don't care. They're not robots. They're not automatons. They're not people. They're human beings. They've got pride. They should have pride. They should have a belief in their own ability, and they should want to, every 90 minutes, bust a gut to win a game for Newcastle United, regardless of Steve Bruce or not.
Yeah. 5-2 was the final score at Stamford Bridge. Thiago Silva, of course, was sent off on the half-hour mark, which meant the floodgates opened. And can Big Sam do what he's got a history of doing and mount a great escape?
No.
Might be too little, too late now. He's still 5 points clear of even getting to the third bottom team. But he like to think he can, Mick. That's the thing. He's got a history of it.
But in the light of what we've just said, Steve, Give me an alternative theory to the fact that today West Bromwich Albion's players went out there and said, "Sod this, we're going to play. We're going to put on a show. We're going to beat Chelsea." Because otherwise, there's no logic behind it. What they have to do first and foremost, whether I don't know, I've never seen the game. You've never seen the game. People listening to this might be watching it in tandem. Maybe Chelsea were awful. Maybe Chelsea were pathetic. Maybe Chelsea, and they did have a man sent off. But that doesn't justify and it's not a reason why West Bromwich Albion, the second worst team in the division, should win 5-2 at Chelsea. What has to happen for West Brom to win 5-2 at Chelsea is for 11 West Bromwich Albion players to put a shift in. For 11 West Bromwich Albion players not to be rubbish, not to be shite like Newcastle were at Brighton, but to put in a bit of a shift. And they've obviously done that. And they've got their rewards. Now, they might have got beat 5-2 themselves, but at least they could have walked off the pitch and said, we put a shift in. Did that happen at Brighton? Will that happen tomorrow? Answers on a postcard.
Jeff, he says, could Bruce get pushed upstairs in an emergency with Jones handling team affairs?
It could happen. But again, that comes back again to the biggest question of all. Does the owner care? Does the owner even know what's going on at the football club? Is the owner even bothered? Because he's obviously not. He's obviously not being told by people at the football club that we need to do this and we need to do that. It's a mess, Steve. It's a complete mess. It's from top to everybody's at that football club since 2007, 2008. People have walked around on eggshells. People are terrified. They're scared of their own shadow. They daren't make decisions. There's been good people at that football club, and there's still good people at that football club who've given up. They've given up. They've stopped caring.
Ginger Hoskins is going on a different direction. He says, Mick, how can Newcastle ever improve when there's a whole scouting team which is from lower league clubs and non-league clubs and have no idea on talent or how to find good players? I mean, it's not a particularly experienced scouting squad from my understanding. I mean, some of the names are in there. They've either played locally or they've played for lower league teams. I can see where Ginger's going with it, but yeah, I mean, these are the people who scouted Joe Linton and decided that £40 million was a good price to pay.
Yeah, I mean, we're now into the realms of all sorts of cans of worms. What's the way to do it? What's the way not to do it? If you want to expand the argument, you talk about, are academies really worth? Funny enough, on my birthday yesterday, my brother-in-law was across, and he's a Leicester season ticket holder, and he's been a Leicester fan for years and years. And you look at their recruitment policy, and I bet you nobody listening to this could tell you who does the recruitment at Leicester City. And yet they pick up people like Undidi, and they pick up Pereira, and they pick up the Belgian boys, and they pick up Tielemans. Yes, they pay money for them, and they pay big money for them, but they get, more often than not, they get it right. Do they bring people through from the academy? Not an awful lot. They get James Maddison from Norwich. So what is the, do we believe that academies are people and our football clubs wasting money on academies? Because invariably nobody comes through the academies these days anyway. We had Graham Carr once upon a time. Now, Graham Carr was incredibly useful and incredibly successful. But what he was doing, I mean, there were all sorts of stories about deals that were being done in France and deals that were done with agencies in France. But we still picked up people like Debuchy, Johan Cabaye, Moussa Sissoko, who, really didn't do much at Newcastle, but, was a good guy. We picked up good French players. But it comes back to that one word I keep mentioning about Ashley, proactive. He's never proactive. He's never thinking about how to improve the club. All he's ever thinking about is how the club survives, how the club stays 17 and upwards in the Premier League. The Sky money keeps rolling in. He doesn't care other than, survival. He doesn't care whether they finish, 17, 16, 15, 14, So recruitment and issues like that aren't even on the radar. It's, I mean, one of the big interesting stats that came out in the week, of course, although I'm not privy to all the details because obviously I'm not working in the Northeast, was this figure about agents' fees. I mean, how does it work, Steve, that a club that is on a downward spiral like that, its agent fees are going that way? Tell me, please tell me. Honestly,
it's crazy.
It's like running a corner shop and saying, we're spending that much on stock and our our sales are going like that. It's just crackers, you know.
Yeah, it's not a good business model, that's for certain.
No.
Jeff, another good question. He says, many of the fans are getting wound up by pundits cliches on Newcastle's commentary games. How do you feel about TV pundits talking about us, Mick?
It's always been the same, Steve. Always been the same. We're an easy target. What I would say is that in the main, the ones who are hypercritical, the ones who are more derogatory than others, are the ones who have no knowledge of Newcastle, who have no... I remember famously doing a thing on 5 Live a lot of years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I'll name him because, I don't think it's not inflammatory and it's not legally divisive. A guy called Giancarlo Galavotti was on. He's an Italian journalist who was flavour of the month in the Premier League when a lot of foreign players were coming in. And I was on one night and... he absolutely slaughtered Newcastle for their delusionary belief that they should be a big club, and they're not a big club, and they're a small club in the northeast of England. And I remember I went off on one and said, "You have no idea. You have no idea." And on the same panel was Steve Claridge, and I've never met Steve Claridge, but Steve Claridge absolutely jumped on him and said, "If you've ever been to Newcastle, if you've ever played," and this guy had never played the game in his life, he said, "if you've ever been there, if you've ever stayed there, if you've ever met them, if you've ever lived and walked the streets of Newcastle, for you to say that they're a small club, for you to say they're delusional is an absolute nonsense. Because if there's only one city in the country that lives and breathes football, it's Newcastle upon Tyne." So I think a lot of it is out of ignorance. A lot of it's out of jealousy, Steve. A lot of it's out of jealousy. Believe me, it is. It is. Some of these ex-players and some of these, pundits, they would love to have been. Again, without wanting to name drop, I was texting James Perch yesterday, Perchy, who had a lovely little career at Newcastle, Perchinio and all that kid did, you'd die for a James Perch now. I would die for a James Perch against Tottenham tomorrow. Not the greatest in the world, but I'll tell you what, every time he pulled that shirt on, he either got booked or he tackled or he fought, and he fought for the club and he fought for himself. And he was texting, he's at Mansfield Town now, and there's a measure of the man. He's still playing football in the lower leagues. But, he got Newcastle and he loved what he had at Newcastle. So a lot of these pundits have never experienced what it's like to either have been a player there, and it's sour grapes. It's sour grapes.
Yeah, definitely sour grapes. Richard Dixon, he says, "I'm a Queen's Park Rangers fan. I look at Newcastle and it's very sad to see that they are run so badly from top to bottom. They have to let the shackles off and Bruce swallow his pride. It's a big game tomorrow." Thanks, Richard. He's right. Yeah, it is a big game. Let's look ahead to it.
Well, QPR, he's a QPR fan. It's an interesting one because Chris Waff of The Athletic was showing me some polls, 4 polls, I think it was, that The Athletic did this week. How well is your club run? How entertaining is your club? How frustrated are your club? Whatever. Newcastle were bottom of every table. But Brighton and Hove Albion were middle at worst in every table, and their fans actually thought they were in the top 3 entertaining sides in the country. And I said to him, that's all about expectation. That's all about expectation. And Brighton and Hove Albion and Queen's Park Rangers, you're talking about chalk and cheese compared to Newcastle, but you can still be a well-run club. You can still be a club that does it properly. And unless Newcastle start doing it properly and get a new owner and get a new regime in, then nothing's going to change, Steve.
No, so let's look ahead to the game tomorrow. Obviously, Steve Bruce has had his press conference yesterday. We know that ASM has got a chance of making it. We think it's going to come a little bit too early for Callum Wilson, although never say never. I know Steve Bruce has got a history of saying players aren't fit and then suddenly they're appearing on the sidelines. So, we may get a shock yet. Isaac Hayden, of course, out for the rest of the season. Fabian Shaw not available tomorrow either. But we obviously expect Martin Dubravka to be available. Despite him having a stomach bug on international duty, he was back for the birth of his child. So we're hoping that he's going to be fit. As for Tottenham, Son has been out injured for Tottenham. He's going to return, but it looks like it'll come too early for Ben Davies, Matt Doherty and Sergio Reguilon, who are all still doubtful. Spurs didn't used to travel well, Mick, but it's a little bit different when you look at recent fixtures, and they're looking to record their 4th straight win at St James's Park. And of course, Jose had a worse record than Tottenham at St James's Park, but he beat the jinx last season by getting a win. So what's your take on the game, mate? What are you hoping to get from this, and what can you see us getting from it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, they were the archetypal softy Southerners once upon a time. You know, even when they had really good teams, they never, you know, and I mentioned the point earlier that after that win in August '93, first game of the season in the Premier League, they only won 2 of 16 visits to Newcastle. But since then, Newcastle have only won 3 of 11. But that's all about Ashley. You know, 2008 was pre-Ashley. 2008 since has been Ashley, and Newcastle as a club and as a set of players have weakened. So, you know, that argument, and you were right, you know, they were once upon a time very poor travellers to St James's. Now, because they're a decent side, because they're a decent squad, they've got every chance of turning Newcastle over. I still think it may be false hope, it may be starry-eyed, I don't know what it is. You know, I always think about Spurs, you've got a chance with Spurs. They might just one day turn up and completely flatter to deceive. But I've tried to pick a team. I mean, I've gone with Dubravka in goal. I've gone with what I believe is probably the only back 4 available at the minute, which is Manquillo, who I quite like, and I liked his quotes after the Brighton game. At least he came out and said, this is not good enough. You know, Lascelles, Clark picked themselves. I would always have Dummett in. I talked about Jamal Lewis a few weeks ago. I just don't think he's a good enough defender. I think if you put Dummett and Lewis together and morphed them, you'd have a proper player. But, you know, Dummy is a good defender and he's a good player. In midfield, you know, Hayden is a big miss. So I think you probably have to go with Willock. You have to go with Shelvey. And I'd like Murphy. I like Murphy. We had this conversation. And that leaves 3 up front. I'd rather pick a bag of potatoes than Joe Linton. So I think I'd go with Fraser and some Maximum if he's fit, and then Almiron through the middle. And you hope that they've got the shooting boots on. You hope that they've got this. I mean, you know, Fraser significantly, and it might be significantly, has scored a goal in midweek for Scotland. So, you know, his confidence might be high. Almiron I like because Almiron's work rate is decent, and he does give me the impression that he cares. If he could just put the ball between the posts. Some Maximum, you know, we know what some Maximum is, can be brilliant 1 minute and then absolutely frustrating for the next 89. But that would be my team. But, you know, wing and a prayer, Steve, wing and a prayer.
Yeah, Fraser's done well at international. Yeah. I mean, you know, you come back, you get a bit of a bounce, don't you? I mean, he's playing in a different formation. He scored 2 goals. He's going to be up for it. You would think. I've always had that feeling though that he just hasn't settled at Newcastle, and I think a lot of it came down to the fact that he was probably hoping to be getting a regular game and seemed to take an age to get into the team. I know he was injured. I know he was struggling coming back from an injury, but Bruce just didn't really seem to get, you know, give him the chance at the start, and he always seems to have had a bit of a chip on his shoulder ever since then. I agree,
100%. I agree, Steve. There's just something about him when I look at him and I watch him, because a bit like Richie, when we signed Richie, you thought that's a good signing. That's a good signing. You know, he's a bit of a star in a mediocre Bournemouth side, and I think Richie's repaid most of the faith that we put in him. Fraser just hasn't. And I'll tell you what worried me as well is, I don't think I ever got to the bottom of the story, but I know he was having a spat, wasn't he, with Bournemouth prior to joining Newcastle. I think, for want of a better phrase, he just stopped playing. He refused to play for them. Allegedly, I'll say allegedly. But when we signed him, bearing in mind we had Wilson and Richie in situ, you thought, well, this is a nice little threesome. They know one another. They're decent players in their own right. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. And Wilson has obliged. Richie, I don't think, has done anything other than, you know, put a shift in for Newcastle. But I agree with you. Ryan Fraser, there's been something about him. He just looks out of sorts. He looks like, and I don't think it helps, to be fair to him, when Steve Bruce then plays him through the middle, as he did the other week. And I'm thinking, this kid's head must be in bits, you know? So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and as you say, it depends which Tottenham Hotspur turn up, because I mean they've got some fantastic players. You know, never mind Son, you've got Harry Kane, you've got Gareth Bale, you've got Dele Alli. You know, it's a plethora of great players who on their day could beat anybody, but you just never know, do you?
And as I say, they have been over the years for me. You know, I mean, most clubs in the Premier League, ex-Premier League, were Premier League, not Premier League anymore. You could pretty much say, they won't, they will, they will, they won't. Tottenham were always the ones for me. Whenever they turned up, I used to think, what on earth? What are they going to be like? I mean, to be fair, we weren't that great at White Hart Lane, but as far as St James's and Spurs are concerned, I do think, I would love to think there's a possibility, but I really don't believe it, Steve. I'm sorry. I would. Leeds at home not long ago, I thought, I can make a case, and then I thought, no, I really can't. And tomorrow, as much as I would love to think, Spurs won't turn up, Newcastle will put a shift in, Newcastle will roll the sleeves up. I don't see either part of that equation. I might see one and not the other, but I think it's hard to see. The only saving grace is, Brighton are at Manchester United. Can't see them getting anything there. Now, Fulham at Villa, I don't know. I mean, we should be bookies, Steve. We should be. Yeah,
that's the job to be.
You get on the phone now, somewhere in Lowfell, L&W bookmakers, Lowe's and Wraith bookmakers. We've missed the boat on this pandemic.
Hey, there's still time, mate. There's still time.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Life Goal says, Fraser looks like the man who went for the manager's job at Marks and Spencer's and ended up being made janitor at Lidl. That's a good...
Ended up with the corner shop. He does. He honestly, he's got a face like a slapped arse, isn't he?
Yes.
I feel like saying, look, you're being paid hundreds and thousands of pounds, millions of pounds to play professional football, and you're walking around like you've lost a quid and found a penny. Honestly, these people do not know they're born. Think of all these poor sods keeping this country alive in the NHS for the last year, who earn an absolute pittance compared to these people who've been playing five-a-side for the last year, don't care, not bothered, and still picking up millions of pounds. The world has gone mad.
Big shout out to Spider VPN, who are our sponsors again this month, main sponsors. Big shout out to Geordie Riffs, their sponsorships slowly coming to an end. Premium guitar lessons for beginners and children, guitar repairs and service and recording studio. Follow them at Geordie Riffs on Instagram, Facebook Geordie Riffs Official, their website's geordieriffs.co.uk, and a big shout out to qtechshop.co.uk, makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Newcastle, and to Jab Signature, who make our flyers and make boxing memorabilia and boxing wear. And subscribe to the channel, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right hand corner, click the thumb up to like. And I am appearing at 5 o'clock on the Saudi show, hosted by Al Walid. Realistic Wraith versus Positive Penman. Positive Penman always goes 3-1, Mick, when he does his predictions. I'm always slightly pessimistic. 9 games to go. Al Walid is actually refereeing, not Steve Bruce. Nice graphic though, and I'm quite happy that I look quite thin on there, Mick, which is great.
Not bad. I'm not going to stand up.
Mick, listen, enjoy Easter, mate. Have a great Easter. Thanks as always for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your birthday weekend, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time when hopefully we've had a few more points in the bag, mate. Yeah,
you're welcome, and thanks again to everyone who wished me a happy birthday. You are absolute diamonds. Thank you very much.
Top man. Take care, mate. Bye-bye.
See you later, pal.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past.